Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. This month in Manhattan, a 31-year-old Asian woman was hit in the head with a hammer by a woman who demanded that she remove her face mask. In Queens, a group of teenagers punched a 15-year-old Asian boy while spewing anti Asian remarks. And in March, a man repeatedly kicked a 65-year-old Asian woman outside a luxury apartment building in Manhattan while witnesses looked on and did nothing. Since last year, Asian Americans have experienced a 150% increase in violent attacks, according to some estimates. What has caused this surge in anti Asian feeling? How does prejudice against Asians and the stereotyping of people of Asian ancestry play out every day? And how do all of us lose out as a result? Frank Wu is an expert on the subject. Born in Ohio to parents who immigrated from Taiwan, he's the first Asian American to become president of Queens College, and he's the author of the book, Yellow: Race in America, Beyond Black and White. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here to talk about such a serious subject.
Hostility towards Asian Americans is nothing new. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late 1800s, which barred Chinese from coming to this country at all. And there was legislation that prevented Chinese who were already here from becoming citizens. And of course, there was the roundup and internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. What do you think has sparked these recent incidents?
Well, we have a toxic environment now. I used to say just 5 years ago that we still have microaggressions. We have the legacy of the history of racism of the past. But generally, in public life, if you're a leader, you can't go around just expressing openly hatred toward any ethnic group. Well, the past few years have shown that actually you can still do that. People will use those slurs, the common cruelty of childhood bullying. I know those words well, and sometimes I even use them in speeches to show they have no power over me. I won't use them on your show, but that's just the beginning. When I was a kid, teachers would say, just reply, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And even as a kid, I knew the words led to the sticks and stones. So these issues have always been with us, but what's happened is we've returned to a period where people can get away with it. You can be a CEO, you can run for public office, you can be a respected leader, and you can just openly say terrible things that it'd be hard to say about some other groups. But if you're talking about the Chinese or those Asians, because of the pandemic, everyone's looking for somebody to blame.
So, I mean, isn't this partly because of, well, Donald Trump and his calling the pandemic the Asian disease? So, hasn't he provoked this kind of behavior?
And the China virus meme on social media, Kung flu, when I first heard terms like that, I thought, well, that's the kind of thing first graders would say, but it's not just first graders. The most brutal example was the mass murder in Atlanta. 8 people shot dead, 6 of them Asian women. The killer confessed, so he admitted he'd done it. And the law enforcement officer in charge of the investigation said he was having a bad day. When I saw that, I thought that has to be fake news. But no, that's what the cop actually said. That's as if to dismiss that it was a hate crime and to deny that there was anything wrong at all when the person murdered 8 people. And then that law enforcement officer who's in charge of the investigation, it turned out he'd been spreading that China virus meme on social media himself. So it's no wonder that he didn't think very much of this and made light of it. But you're absolutely right. This is just going around on social media and it's scapegoating. It's taking a very real problem, a disease, and saying this virus, it's your fault.
So, we've got the scapegoating of Asian Americans because of the pandemic. Do you think it's also related to the fact that there are a lot more Asian Americans today? I mean, there's been a big increase in immigration among Asian Americans, for the last probably couple of decades. And are we sort of experiencing this, they're coming and they're taking over kind of feeling?
You got it just right. That's always been a theme. It's the yellow peril. It's the idea of an invasion. How come the Asians are taking over? Why is every spelling bee and science fair and math contest being won by someone named Nguyen or Kim or Patel? What happened to all the real Americans? And that's been a theme again and again and again. That isn't new either, but you're right. Since the laws were changed in 1965, so before that time period, our immigration laws were openly based on race and ethnicity, where you were coming from. But in 1965, there was reform, and that opened the doors to the critics. It opened the floodgates, and Asian Americans now are the fastest growing racial minority group, and it's driven by newcomers. There used to be a pejorative phrase. It's become a hit TV show, fresh off the boat, right? And it's because all these folks are coming now that you see this boom. Queens has been transformed. Flushing, which in the 80s, it was not Asian. And when Asian immigrants first started to come in those numbers, there was backlash. But now, seeing Asian Americans in leadership roles, it's not surprising anymore, but it is threatening. People are wondering, what's going on? Where did these Asians come from?
Right. Do you think it's also partly related to the rising economic power of China? That, maybe we, after a while, America may not be the big dog anymore?
That's right. There's a phenomenon, I call it the perpetual foreigner syndrome. And it's the idea, even if you're sixth generation, so, there are New Yorkers of Asian descent whose great, 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 great grandparents came to the United States, and they can trace their ancestry just in Chinatown, whether it's in Manhattan or Queens or Brooklyn, back 3 generations. So they're not fresh off the boat. Yet people still say, go back to where you came from. Even if they're assimilated, even if they only speak English, they got nothing to do with China. But there is a fear. You're absolutely right. It's the fear of the rise of the East,
Right.
land of the West. Which side are you on?
How satisfied are you with the public response to this rise in anti-Asian incidents?
It gives me hope. There was a rally in downtown Flushing just 2 weekends ago, and I was honored to be there. I looked out at the crowd and I said something, and I meant it. I'd never seen so many Asian Americans standing up and speaking out, marching at a rally. You just don't see that sort of thing, right? Asians aren't the sort of people you think are going to be protesters and activists. But more than that, there were leaders, public officials who were white, were black, were Latinx, civil rights activists. So Senator Chuck Schumer was there, Mayor Bill de Blasio was there, the New York State Attorney General was there. The borough president sponsored it. That's Donovan Richards with Congresswoman Grace Meng. Al Sharpton came and gave a moving speech about how important it was for him to be there, because he would be a hypocrite if he didn't stand up when the victim was someone who's Asian American. And some of the African American speakers, in a poignant, principled way, called out and said, if this is being done by folks who are black or brown, they need to be held to account too. And I want to be very clear. We don't want to perpetuate an image of black criminality either. There are people of all backgrounds who are perpetrating these attacks, so that Asian Americans, they feel you can't even walk down the street without the possibility that someone's going to come after you with a hammer or an axe. So I'm given hope.
And of course, President Biden has weighed in as well.
That's
At least people are talking about the forms that disparate treatment of Asian Americans can take. We're starting to hear about the bamboo ceiling in corporate America. What is that? And is it something that you have observed is going on?
That's the Asian version of the glass ceiling. Absolutely. Even in areas where you think Asian Americans, the stereotype is you're doing well, maybe even a little too well. You find that, for example, in Silicon Valley, there was a study done. Asian Americans are promoted into management in high tech at lower rates than members of any other ethnic group, including other people of color. And I'm very fortunate. I was named to serve as president of Queens College. There was someone else, David Wu, named just a few weeks earlier president at Baruch College. He was the first Asian American to be president of any campus in the CUNY system, and I'm the first at Queens College. That's, on the one hand, wonderful. I'm so gratified and humbled to be here. On the other hand, when you look around and you look at, are there Asian Americans who are deans, who are provosts, who are college presidents? Few and far between, even though the reputation is Asian Americans, whiz kid, rocket scientist, overachievers, but they just don't move up, in part because of the sense that, well, you're really foreign, or a sense that you're taking over. And so there's this lingering prejudice in the background. We're now talking about it. And President Biden, I don't remember any other president doing what he's done. He's mentioned this multiple times.
I think a lot of people will be surprised that seems to be some kind of discrimination against Asians in the working world, because as you said, everybody thinks they're doing great, you know. Other forms of discrimination or racial treatment of Asians. In one of your articles, you wrote about being stared at and being looked through. Tell me about that.
Right. So Asian Americans are simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, right? So many studies show that Asian Americans get hired at the entry level as accountants, as lawyers. So they get hired at high rates, sometimes more than other people of color, but then they don't get promoted. So they're just always relegated to the lower ranks, or as engineers, they're the researchers, they're the scientists who do the grunt work, right? But they never get to be in charge. They don't move upward. In part, it's because, actually, it's ironic. The very image of Asian Americans as super successful is holding us back. Here's what I mean. Because that stereotype, it sounds so good. People call it the model minority. Oh, you Asians, you're good with math and numbers. You're just doing so well. But what it leads to is whitewashing of bias, so that when you say, wait a minute, we're not, people scoff. Oh, come on. You're all just crazy rich Asians. You don't have any problems. What do you have to complain about? Or it leads to actual racial resentment because people think you're doing a little too well. You know, we're a nation that celebrates the underdog, right? If you're an overachiever, we want to see you take your fall. Sometimes that image is also just being used to, it's false flattery. It's just being used to put down other people of color, to say, look at the Asians, they made it. Why can't you?
You also hear this, it's said by, I guess, a lot of people who are not Asian. They all look alike.
That's right.
And I have to admit that I have sometimes been guilty of that. But what is that about? Is that just, obviously all Asians don't look alike. So is that just kind of racialist thinking? What is that about?
It you see it in the hate crimes. It's such a common part of the Asian American experience, this mistaken identity. I'll give you an example of how it works. So when you look at these attacks where someone says, this disease is your fault, you brought this here. First of all, it's mistaken identity because many of the people being attacked, they're Korean, they're Filipino. There was even a Chicano woman, not even Asian at all, who the person attacking her thought she was. So it's mistaken identity. It's the wrong ethnicity. Then it's mistaken identity because these are Americans, not foreigners. Now, don't get me wrong. It wouldn't be right if you went and found a Chinese foreigner and said, I'm going to take out my anger on you. But hatred, there's no precision. Before someone comes and spits on you, they don't say, hey, could I see your passport? Because if you got a US passport, we'll leave you alone, right? They're going to come after you no matter what. It's part of this idea that Asians are this faceless horde, a mass. That's always been the theme, that Asia will take over because just so many Asians, right? That America can't compete. So all the positive traits that are assigned Asians get flipped around. I'll give you an example. It's almost a cliche. There are some Asian Americans who are super successful child prodigies, and if you're playing the piano at Carnegie Hall at the age of 7, what is it they say about it? Oh, technically perfect, but no character, no soul. So when Asians succeed that way, even the fact that they're perfect is held against them. And it's the idea you all look alike, you all sound alike, you're just robots, right? No actual emotion, no humanity. So even when you do a good job, the idea is, oh, you're just good with numbers. You don't have people skills, right? No one's going to relate to you and warm up to you. And so we can't put you in charge of anything.
You referred to the whole model minority stereotype. African Americans would probably say, I wish somebody would call us a model minority. What's the downside of the model minority trope? What's bad about that?
I applaud anyone who's been super successful. They deserve our respect. But there's actually a version of this for all sorts of minority groups. So if someone says to a Black person, you're so articulate, all right, that's sort of a compliment, but what are they really saying? They're not saying it out loud, but what they're saying is, I have an image in my head of the way you should sound, and you don't sound that way. And I'm so shocked, I'm going to say, wow, you're one of the smart ones, right? So it's a compliment on its face, but once you think about it, I know a lot of African Americans who they don't want to be told by a white person, oh, you're so articulate, right? Or sometimes you hear people say, Blacks, natural athletes, right? Sometimes commentators in sports say that. And then they'll say something right away after that that's really troubling about how it's just brute strength. It's not real skill, right? You can be a linebacker, but not the quarterback, right? So many of these generalizations, even though they seem positive, or someone says, oh, Jews, good at making money. You have to wonder about that because it ties into so much anti-Semitic tradition. So many of these general positive statements conceal a little kernel of resentment and anger. And the model minority myth, it boxes you in. It says you can't be normal, right? You have to be the neurosurgeon, Nobel Prize winner who went to college at the age of 11, right? Or you're worthless. You can't be an artist. You can't be an athlete if you're of Asian background. You have to stick to math and science. So it boxes people in this way. But as I said, to me, the most troubling part is often it's not even about Asian Americans. It's just a way to put down other people of color by inappropriate comparison.
And one problem is, when in a country that is so racialized, is that often, at least the non-white minority groups are sometimes at odds with each other. One issue in recent years claims that affirmative action for Blacks and Latinos discriminates against Asians. There's currently a lawsuit against Harvard that says, Harvard is discriminating against Asian Americans who should be getting in instead of the Blacks and Latinos that they're letting in. You have testified in Congress in favor of affirmative action. What do you think about the Harvard lawsuit?
So the claim is made again and again and again that Asian Americans face bias. I actually think Asian Americans do face bias, but what happens then is when Asian Americans complain, people say, don't blame us, blame Black people. And that, when you think about it, that doesn't actually make any sense. Yes, Asian Americans might well face bias, and we should address that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about diversity and inclusion and equity for African Americans. It just makes no sense. It's when someone is angry, deflecting and pointing them at some other group that has nothing to do with the issue and saying, go get mad at them. And as you said, it just contributes to misunderstanding and anger. And I'm all about bridge building and coalitions. There's a better way here.
On the other hand, there's currently a debate over how to make the city's elite public schools, high schools, more diverse. If you look at a place like Stuyvesant High School, Asian Americans are something like 70%. And there's talk about changing the admissions requirements so that, so that you get more diversity. How do you feel about, do you think we should change the admissions requirements?
So I think we should have a discussion that includes everyone. Part of the problem is Asian American parents and kids, and I feel for them. They have a sense everyone's coming after them, right? That people are just uncomfortable that Asian Americans are doing well. There's another way to think about this, though. Instead of trying to pit different groups against each other, we can ask, what is it that we want our public institutions to look like? How do we want them to function? Do we want them to include people of all backgrounds? Do we want, when we walk down the halls, to see that there are African American kids, Latinx kids, alongside Asian American and white kids? Is that actually important to us? And I actually think it is. Then how do we achieve that in a way that's fair and equitable? And it's not easy. I know that. But the way that the conversation goes, it just gets everyone mad. It doesn't matter what your identity is. The way it's been depicted is, all right, either you're for Asian Americans or you're for African Americans and Latinx kids. You can't be for both. And that doesn't make sense. There is a way that you could actually be for everyone. That's what our democracy is about. That's this whole experiment in self-governance. That's what makes New York City great. It's the ideals that beckon the world over. It's why my parents came. It's why other people's grandparents came. It's why the great migration of African Americans from the Deep South for decades, why people were attracted, because they thought, all right, here's some place I can go where I'm going to actually have a fair shot. So the question for me is, how do we create these institutions that are selective? They don't take everyone. How do we set some standards that we can agree on in advance that will promote excellence and diversity as compatible, not in conflict?
In recent years, the Asian American presence has come more to the fore in the United States. I mean, as you see more Asian Americans in public and elected office. You see a few more Asians on television and in movies and even, directing movies and all of that. You see a lot of Asians who are successful in business. And this month is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So there is progress, correct? Do you think?
Absolutely. There's been so much progress. When I was a kid, if you had said someday you're going to be a college president, if you had said that to me when I was a professor, I would have said, no, that's never going to happen. And there's so much diversity within. I always, when we talk about this, pause, and I want to acknowledge, there are also Asian adoptees whose parents are white. There are Afro-Asians. We hardly ever think about that, but there's a huge population, including in New York City, of people who are proudly mixed. And when you talk about Black Asian issues, they're Blasian, so they can see every perspective. They've got cousins on all sides of this.
One thing I have to throw in, I think African Americans have their own particular grievance against Americans. As you pointed out, some of these attacks on Asians has been done by African Americans. But this feeling that Asians look down on African Americans. I mean, I can tell you my experience with taxi drivers in New York City. It used to be the white drivers who would pass by me. More recently, it's been the Asian cab drivers who passed by me. So I don't know what I want you. I don't know what my question is.
I'm glad you raised this because I want to respond. I'm going to say a few things. It is important for anyone who's Asian American to call out anti-Blackness among Asian Americans. It exists. It is real. You are not imagining it. And whenever I see that, I think to myself, oh, Geez, you really should not think that. You shouldn't say that. And, if you just showed up from Mars uh, and landed here, or if you came from China and landed here and just watched TV and the movies, you would instantly get all these stereotypes and absorb it. That's not to excuse it. It's to say, I want to try to reach Asian Americans and say, well, this is it. Black Lives Matter is important to you. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, which was the culmination of the historic struggle for Black equality, led to the 1965 Immigration Act. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for African Americans marching and fighting, even after the Atlanta attacks. There's some Asian Americans who've contacted me and said, hey, Wu, when are you going to stand up for Asian Americans against Black people? And I'm just shocked because I think to myself, all right, it's not that the Black community as a whole is trying to attack Asian Americans. There's some individuals, and framing it as if we believe these stereotypes of Black criminality will just make everything worse for everyone. We should and have been out there as allies. One of Malcolm X's closest allies was a Japanese American woman named Yuri Kochiyama. Not many people know that, but Asian Americans have been involved. We've got to stay involved with Black Lives Matter and with this historic struggle of all people of color.
So is the answer that we as individuals need to examine our own prejudicial, racialized feeling and see what we as individuals can do to break down these stereotypes?
Individuals, society, and institutions, everyone who claims to be a leader, the pandemic has given us an opportunity. If you had said before this crazy 13 months, I want to reinvent the world, people would have laughed at you. But now coming out of all this, everyone yearns, not just that we see one another soon and safely, but that we think about how do we make this world better than it was in 2020? This is our opportunity.
So it's complicated, but then on the other hand, it's not if we just choose to look at people as individuals and not as racial groups.
And build bridges at every opportunity rather than burn them down. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank Frank Wu, president of Queens College and the author of Yellow, Race in America, Beyond Black and White, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, be sure to follow us on Twitter at One2One CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and One2One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.